I'm Ben Kiefer, and today you're listening to an archive edition of our program. Well, when you need a lawyer, you probably assume you can find one. But what if you live in a rural county where attorneys are few and far between or don't exist at all? A new study from Iowa State University has found that more than half of rural counties in the contiguous U.S. are what researchers call legal deserts, places where residents have severely limited access to legal services. So, in this portion of the program, we're exploring what this means to live in these communities. We'll look at the barriers that rural residents face, from conflict of interest issues to attorney specialization, and explore innovative solutions being tried in other states. What does justice look like when the nearest lawyer is an hour away? Well, let's find out. Yesterday, I spoke with Dave Peters, professor of sociology and extension rural sociologist at Iowa State University in Ames. He's the lead researcher on this ISU Legal Deserts study. Dave, welcome back to our program.
Thanks, Ben. Happy to be here.
Emma Bartling joins us as well. She graduated from Iowa State University in the spring of 2025. Currently, she's a law student at the University of South Dakota, and she is a research assistant on this study and plans to practice in rural areas. Emma Bartling, welcome to you.
Thank you, Ben.
Dave, let's start with you. Walk us through the headline finding of your study here. More than half of rural counties are legal deserts. What does that actually mean?
Well, what that means is that those counties don't have a lawyer in their county, and there's no lawyer in any of the surrounding counties. And since most of these counties are out west, we're talking about counties that are 2 to 3 times the size of a typical Iowa county. So people might be driving, as you said, an hour, 2 hours just to find that nearest attorney.
And so how do you, is this simply numbers of attorneys per capita or other factors included in defining a legal desert?
Right. One of the things that we were addressing in the literature is that a lot of the existing papers measure this as attorneys per population. And we found that was a poor measure because it really doesn't account for the demand for attorneys. So rural communities might have different levels of land valuation. They might have large employers like a factory or a large corporation, or they might have a large number of government institutions that might need more lawyers. So we estimated the demand for attorneys in each of the counties in the United States and then backed out the supply. So, for example, if you're a small rural community and you only have one attorney, that might be entirely sufficient. But you might have that same county, the same population size, that might have large employers, a lot of high land values. Maybe there's a natural amenity like a lake in Okoboji where people have a lot of property. You might need 2 or 3 times the number of attorneys given the mix of people, the mix of businesses, the mix of industries in that community. So we wanted to have a more nuanced approach to see what is the demand for legal services, not just as a function of population.
This was a study of what we call the lower 48 United States. Let's zoom in on Iowa. Which Iowa counties are most affected by this shortage?
So what we found is that the state's micropolitan communities were most at risk for being in a legal desert. And you might ask, what is a micropolitan? So we have metropolitans, which are the big cities, Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, Waterloo. But micropolitans are cities between 10,000 and just under 50,000. So micro means small, politan means city. And these areas tend to have the worst legal shortages in Iowa. For example, in Lee County, in the far southeast corner of the state, home to Fort Madison and Keokuk, they have the worst attorney shortage in Iowa and ranked as one of the worst attorney shortages in the lower 48 U.S. Other kinds of micropolitans were Clinton, Iowa, Webster County, home to Fort Dodge, Mahaska County, where Oskaloosa is. So again, these cities of about 30,000 people, they seem to have the worst legal shortages. Not that they don't have lawyers. So, for example, in Fort Madison and Keokuk, they have about 30 attorneys present in that county. But given the complexity of that economy, they really need 54 attorneys. So they're short about 24 attorneys. So that's why we use this demand for legal services rather than just population. Because without that, we wouldn't have picked up that Fort Madison or Keokuk actually were a legal desert if we were just using population. That's why we use this demand, because of the complexity of that micropolitan's economy. They need 54 lawyers, but they only have 30.
Right. And I know we wanted to dig into specialization when it comes to legal services in a moment, but are we seeing a decline in rural attorneys or has it always been this way? Is this something new?
I would say it is recently new. I think in prior generations, particularly in the baby boomer generation, when rural economies were more robust, when the farm economy was stronger, where there was a large manufacturing base in most of rural America, that there were enough people staying. So you had both an economic base to hire attorneys, and people were out. There was less outmigration back in the 60s and 70s. So you also had people. But as we've shifted a lot of our manufacturing overseas, as farms have become larger and there's fewer farmers, as those populations have begun to shrunk, both the economic base and the population base has begun to shrunk in rural communities, it's much more harder for attorneys to make a living in these smaller communities. So we see attorneys retiring, and no younger attorneys are moving into these communities to take that legal practice. So it's something we've seen in probably the last 30 years.
Hmm. Emma Bartling, to you here, as part of this, an assistant on this study, I understand you discovered that conflict of interest, a major issue here in rural areas, and this gets to the point of specialization. Explain what you mean by conflict of interest.
So, just as kind of an example, if two parties are seeking a divorce, one party can go solicit services, kind of tell them what they're thinking, a certain lawyer or a certain practice, and then that practice, even if they do not decide to go with that type of representation from that specific practice, that practice cannot represent the other party because it would be biased. So just looking at that, that creates a lot of conflict of interest. Same goes with like contract disputes, domestic violence, divorce, anything that you would have two parties disputing an issue. It kind of blurs the lines a little bit, and then those parties who didn't have fine representation in the city or the county or the area around them would have to travel even further to get a non-biased or party to represent them.
Mm. Dave, expand on what this means for a community, the types of scenarios like Emma just described, maybe some other scenarios when they don't have adequate legal services.
Well, I mean, I think the large, yeah, I mean, you're right. So the larger issue is that if rural people don't have access to lawyers, that really limits their ability to seek their legal rights and to seek redress in the court system. So obviously, the court system, the legal system, only works if you have a lawyer representing and advocating for your interests. But more specifically, for example, a lack of criminal defense attorneys puts rural people at risk of longer criminal sentences, puts them at risk for criminal conviction. A lack of personal injury attorneys limits rural people the ability to pursue workers' compensation claims or disability claims. And this is particularly important given that most of rural jobs tend to be more injury prone in agriculture, in mining, in manufacturing, and construction. And then not having enough family law attorneys present makes it difficult for people to seek divorce decrees or to enforce child support or child custody issues. And from a domestic violence point of view, not having a family law attorney to seek a protection order puts rural women at risk to domestic violence.
Mm-hmm. Dave Peters, a few words on how you conducted this study.
Right. So when Emma and myself and another research assistant started looking at the literature, it was mainly in the legal scholars. We found that there was a couple issues. One, there was a lack of good data. So most of the existing studies used state bar association lists, and the problem with that is it includes attorneys that are retired. It includes attorneys who work for corporations or for the government and are not engaged in private practice. It includes attorneys that are not in any kind of legal profession. So we used a data source from the Census Bureau that only includes private practice attorneys that can be hired by the public. So there's a lot of attorneys, but most of those you can't go out and hire. So that was one issue. The second one that I mentioned, most of the studies looked at just the number of lawyers per capita or per population, and we really wanted to look at the demand for lawyers and back that out. So what we call a lawyer gap analysis. And then, additionally, we wanted to review some of the state policies that are currently or have been used across the country and see, do those policies actually work to address the legal deserts that we found? And one general finding that we found out is that most of these state programs do, in fact, put attorneys into rural areas, but they put attorneys into rural communities that are not necessarily legal deserts. So the policies work at putting more rural attorneys in rural communities, but they're not going to the communities that are worst hit by the legal shortage.
Dave and Emma, after a short break in just a moment, I wanted to get into more on the solutions side here. But Dave, quickly, before we do go to break, are there fewer young attorneys choosing rural practice than in previous generations?
Yes, I think so. One, I think that the bar to get into law school is so high, and the cost of attending a law school these days is very expensive, that I believe that there are many law students that would prefer to go to a rural community, but given the amount of debt that they have leaving law school, they're simply not able to financially practice in a rural area. They have to go to larger cities to do that. Further, as we continue to lose young people in rural communities, for each year, each decade, there's fewer and fewer rural kids going to college, because there's fewer rural kids, fewer going to law schools. And if you're not from a rural background, if you don't come from a rural community, you would never consider going to practice in a small town. So that's a major challenge, just the debt incurred by law students.
Back after a short break, Dave Peters of Iowa State University is the lead researcher in Legal Deserts Study. Emma Bartling, a research assistant on the study, will be back with more as we look at what they found out as possible best remedies for these legal deserts, places in the United States, rural areas where residents have severely limited access to legal services. Back in just a moment. It's River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer, and today you're listening to an archive edition of River to River, discussing this portion of the program, a new study from Iowa State University that has found that more than half of rural counties in the lower 48, the contiguous U.S., states are what researchers call legal deserts, places where residents have severely limited access to legal services. We're listening to a conversation recorded yesterday with lead researcher in this ISU Legal Deserts study, Dave Peters of Iowa State. Emma Bartling, she's now a law student at the University of South Dakota. She graduated in 2025 from Iowa State University, a research assistant on this study. So, Dave, based on your research here, we talked about all the problems that a lack of legal services causes in more rural communities. What do you think are the most promising approaches to addressing the legal deserts?
Right. I would say the most popular program that states have used is essentially trying to do incentive programs or recruitment programs, essentially giving lawyers money to locate to a rural community. But in our analysis, both looking at those programs and looking at where legal deserts occur, the money offered is not enough to cover the gap between urban lawyer wages and rural lawyer wages. And the money is only short term. So a lot of these recruitment and incentive programs, while they may seem like a logical, straightforward solution, in a sense, really don't work because the money isn't enough to overcome that rural-urban wage gap for lawyers. So when Emma and myself look through all of these state programs, we believe there's a program called a licensed legal paraprofessional, which we abbreviated as an LLP. And these are individuals that you can think of it like a nurse practitioner is related to a doctor or how a physician assistant is linked to a medical doctor. These are individuals that are licensed by the state bar, and they're a step above a paralegal, and they provide legal services in certain areas without the direct supervision of a licensed attorney, and they take cases that are more routine, things in family law, debt collection, landlord-tenant relations. So they basically help a licensed attorney do a lot of the groundwork for the cases, with more complex cases referred to an attorney. And the reason we like these programs is that, one, it encourages people living in rural communities to become an LLP. They're connected to the community, they know the people, they're already living there. The amount of time it takes to be licensed is a lot shorter, and the cost is a lot less. And we don't really see them as replacing rural attorneys, but really helping rural attorneys by taking care of a lot of these routine tasks that just make that attorney more efficient.
Mm-hmm. And Dave, to what extent has Iowa implemented these policies that you describe here? How does Iowa fit in with these programs that you just named?
Iowa does not have any rural attorney recruitment or incentive program right now, and they do not have a licensed legal paraprofessional program right now. In terms of the incentive program, South Dakota has one of the longest and probably most successful attorney recruitment programs. LLP programs tend to happen in Western states. We have really good ones in Oregon and Washington and New Hampshire. There's also one in Minnesota. But currently, Iowa doesn't have any kind of rural attorney program, whether that's an LLP or whether that's some sort of financial incentive program.
Mm-hmm. Emma Bartling, a recent graduate of Iowa State University, but now currently a law student at the University of South Dakota. And I understand for your career, you're really drawn to working in rural areas. Did choosing South Dakota University have something to do with your ultimate goals here? And tell us about the differences here between Iowa and South Dakota.
It definitely did. I think attending University of South Dakota's law school, provided me with way more opportunities to have practical knowledge and practical experiences within these rural communities, just given that the rural attorney recruitment program helps with internships as well as placement after. Graduation was extremely beneficial and something that I saw great benefit in and being able to participate in as a student in their law school. Iowa doesn't really have any placement that I saw that would really make that a better choice for me, especially as somebody who wants to return to a rural area. South Dakota had much better opportunities and more connections that they were willing to help you with placement.
Yeah. Emma, what draws you personally to the idea of practicing in a rural area?
As somebody who grew up in a rural area, I understand the needs of the people, understand the lifestyle, understand why people would want to stay. It's just something that I can't see myself being placed anywhere else. It's a part of rural life that is just extremely appealing to me as somebody who came from a farming background.
Are you seeing interest among your fellow law students there in South Dakota in rural practice, or are you sort of the outlier?
I would say there's about five of us who would be considering going back to rural areas, and all five of us are from rural communities itself. So we grew up with a love of the community and just the rural lifestyle. So I think it's more of somebody who started there and wants to go back rather than somebody who isn't from that background, as Dave alluded to before.
Mhm. Dave Peters, if Iowa implemented programs to incentivize rural practice, what kind of timeline would we be looking at to see change and address the shortages and all the implications of that for our rural population here in the state?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it would come down to the amount of the incentive and also how well the state markets it to people that are in undergraduate schools right now. So I think one of the issues that we have is that if you want to get people interested in doing rural law or being a rural attorney, by the time they get to law school, it might be too late. So it's really beginning to, like in Emma's case, get students interested as undergraduates, thinking, yeah, I might go to law school, and really have a program to get them interested in interning as an undergraduate in a rural community. That way, when they apply to law school, they know from day one, stepping foot on that law school campus, that they are willing and wanting to do that rural attorney program. Second, I think that there's other issues the state could do. So obviously, a rural attorney recruitment program would be beneficial for rural Iowa, and the state should, investigate legislation to do that. But there's also a lot of non-economic issues as well. You might have people who would be interested in doing a rural attorney program, but they may have a spouse that says, I can't find a job. There's not enough daycare spots. There's not a clinic close by. There's other issues, I believe, that factor into this calculus as well.
Dave, in conclusion here, I wonder if you've been able to find out if this legal desert issue is ultimately about an attorney shortage in rural areas of our country, or more fundamentally tied to a broader rural population and economic decline.
Yeah, I would say the latter, the second part of that, is that we have plenty of attorneys. Our law schools produce plenty of attorneys. It's just they're not distributed equally across the country. So, and that reflects, as you were saying, a more fundamental change in our nation, that rural communities are economically lagging behind. They're lagging behind in population. And as more people continue to leave, it sort of spirals downward. You can only incentivize so much. People want to have to be willing to live in a rural community and enjoy living in a rural community. And we're lucky we have phenomenal students like Emma who are from a rural area and went to Iowa State and are now going to law school that want to return. But as young people like Emma become fewer and fewer as the population decreases, birth rates decline, there's smaller families, we're going to have fewer rural students coming through our universities that may even be interested in being a rural attorney or a rural doctor or a rural nurse or any other of the critical professions that are sorely needed in a lot of rural areas.
Dave Peters is the lead researcher on an ISU legal deserts study. Emma Bartling was a research assistant on the study. Emma and Dave, thank you very much for this conversation.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about our work.
Thank you so much, Ben.
It's River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer. Today, in this portion of the program, examining legal deserts in rural Iowa, the rural parts of our country, why attorneys are scarce in small communities, and whether simply putting more lawyers at those towns solves the problem. Let's continue this conversation. Drill down a bit on that last little phrase I mentioned. Brian Farrell is Associate Professor of Instruction at the University of Iowa College of Law. Welcome to our studio, Brian.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for the invitation.
So you are a researcher who has looked into whether attorney presence actually improves justice in rural communities. A little background, I understand you practiced in Goose Lake and Maquoketa in eastern Iowa. So you have experience as a small-town lawyer, as a solo practitioner also. You've researched whether having attorneys in rural areas actually improves access to justice. What have you found?
Yeah, and I think that it's important to think about these as two related but separate things. There's a decline in the number of rural attorneys, and as Dave mentioned, rural communities are facing a lot of challenges, and there's been ongoing decline in a lot of places economically in terms of population. With the access to justice portion, I think what we see is that there are a lot of access to justice needs, meaning people's legal problems that they need information, services, access to resolution. An attorney is an important part of that. An attorney can be a player in the realm of access to justice, might be the person who helps vindicate rights, but they're not the exclusive part of that. People need information. People need access to resources. People may be able to handle their own problems. People may just need advice and not representation. And so I think our research, my colleague Daria Fisher-Page and I, what we tried to do is look at this as problems of rural access to justice, very real, on the increase, and the decline of rural attorneys. Two things that are happening, but not necessarily completely tied to one another. And I think something that Dave and Emma talked about, the fact that just having an attorney in a community does not mean that that attorney is going to meet the needs of especially an underserved population in that community.
What types of legal work tends to go undone in rural communities?
So we hear a lot about family law, custody issues, divorces, mental health, and substance abuse commitments. simple sort of day-to-day transactional work that people need done, help with estates, wills, contracts. Housing needs are very often, people think they have a housing problem. What they have is a legal problem. Sort of in the other realm, criminal defense work is often a challenge in rural areas, and it depends very much how a system is set up in a particular state.
Mm-hmm. So why isn't incentivizing rural practice not necessarily a solution to access to justice problems? Explain that a little more.
Yeah, so what I'd say is that incentive programs are not a silver bullet. They can be useful, and I think South Dakota provides a good example of an incentive program that has a decade of success. They have gotten recent graduates to return to rural areas. Mm-hmm. They have helped those communities. They are not always doing work that targets access to justice needs. And think about it this way, and I think Dave used the healthcare analogy. Having a dermatologist in a community may not serve all of the medical needs, all the healthcare needs of that rural community if they don't have an urgent care clinic or an ambulance. And so it's kind of a matter of meeting those needs. Now, I think one important thing, and Hannah Haxgard, who teaches at the University of South Dakota, wrote a wonderful book called The Rural Lawyer, looking at the first decade of that program, looking at the experience of the attorneys who went there. And I think one point she makes is we often think about this attorney incentive programs as specifically dealing with access to justice. And again, they may, but a lot of them aren't tailored to promote specifically access to justice. But having an attorney in a community may be valuable in a lot of other reasons. And this is another thing that I don't think we think about and talk about enough in the literature and in conversations, that an attorney in a rural community is someone who owns or buys property, pays taxes, employs people, shops on Main Street, helps facilitate business, maybe an entrepreneur themselves. They're a civic leader. They're engaged with nonprofit boards. So there's all these things that an attorney may do in a small town that might not necessarily be access to justice, thinking about, preventing someone from getting evicted from their home.
Right. And also if someone seeks legal services from outside the town, the things you just mentioned aren't present in the town, and it contributes to that ongoing hollowing out of a rural community.
Exactly. And so I think one thing that we can look at is, the incentive programs may be as much economic development as they are access to justice.
Also with Dave and Emma, we discussed whether we need that legal equivalent of nurse practitioners, LLPs. What would that look like? And is that something that we need to explore for a moment? We only have a couple minutes left.
Yeah, and as Dave mentioned, this is happening in Western states. They're being a little more innovative. And I think there's a recognition that this allows people, especially rural people, to serve their community without going away for 3 years, without accumulating debt, and being able to handle lower level issues that often are the access to justice needs of a particular population. I would say that those types of programs are something that policymakers in places like Iowa are aware of, are looking at, are considering. I don't know that there is imminent action on the front with this type of
When you say considering, do you know that current lawmakers in Iowa know of these problems, are discussing it? It just might not make it into the next legislative session.
So the state Supreme Court's Access to Justice Commission, I'm aware, is having conversations about this. They're monitoring what's going on, and I think trying to identify whether this could be a possible piece of a solution in Iowa. Now, in some places, this has been seen as a threat to the bar. Potentially taking away work from attorneys. And I think very often we're seeing that attorneys in those areas are actually quite comfortable with this because those licensed practitioners are handling areas of law issues that they aren't necessarily wanting to do as attorneys.
Brian, we have about a minute left. What got left out or something you want to emphasize in the final minute here? I know I'm cramming, trying to get that in here.
No, and that's fine. And I think the other thing that we talk about when we talk about the deserts is counties, right? Yep. We're dealing with these county lines. And Dave mentioned Clinton. I was back in Delmer, where my father's family's from yesterday for my uncle's funeral. Delmer's 10 minutes from Maquoketa in Jackson County. It's about 40 minutes from Clinton, the county seat of Clinton County. It's also 40 minutes from Dubuque and Davenport. And so Delmer, someone's access to justice or someone's legal desert status would be determined by the number of attorneys in that county. And I think it's important for us to recognize people in Delmer work, shop in Maquoketa very often. They work in Dubuque. They work in Davenport. And so legal services, lawyers tend to think about county lines as very relevant, and in some areas of the law they are. But those county lines are not necessarily a barrier to people going elsewhere to get those services.
Right. I've never run down a highway in my car and encountered a barrier at the county line. There's a nice little sign, usually, welcoming you to the next county. Thank you very much. Brian Farrell, Associate Professor of Instruction at the University of Iowa College of Law, looking at whether attorney presence actually improves access to justice in rural communities. Thanks for coming in, Brian.
Thank you, Ben.
Back with more River to River in just a moment. You're listening to an archive edition of River to River. I'm Ben Kiefer. Let's take a few minutes to talk about heat. Well, not the temperature on that thermometer hanging outside your door or on your phone's weather app, but the temperature inside your home, which could be dangerously different. A team of Iowa State University researchers has developed an app that predicts when individual homes will become unsafe during heat waves, for example, and it's personalized for each building's characteristics. It's a project that grew from a simple question asked by the Polk County Health Department number of years ago. Why do some homes in the Des Moines area get so much hotter than others? Well, the answer involved architecture professors, engineers, data scientists, and years of community engagement. Let's talk about it with three members of this collaboration from Iowa State University, all of them in our Ames studio. Welcome to Ulrika Passa, Professor of Architecture, Director of the Center for Building Energy Research. Welcome back to our program, Ulrika.
Thank you very much for having us, Bill.
Also with Ulrika in the studio, Michael Dornike, Morrell Professor of Industrial and Manufacturing Systems Engineering at ISU. Michael, welcome to you.
Welcome. Thank you.
And Bhaskar Ganapati Subramanian. Bhaskar is the Anderlich Professor of Mechanical Engineering. Bhaskar, welcome back to you.
Happy to be back.
So let's talk about how this app works, why it matters for equity, climate adaptation, and what you've learned from working directly with Des Moines residents. Ulrika, let me start off with you. I understand this has perhaps its roots in a book that you wrote some 10 years ago about natural ventilation in buildings. What did you identify in that book about how we assess buildings as our climate changes?
Well, thank you for that question, Ben. So natural ventilation is a strategy to condition buildings with natural forces around the buildings, right? Wind, and also related to the sun and orientation. And what I learned when I wrote that book in 2015 with my colleague Francine Battaglia is that there are the outside conditions around buildings are very hard to assess and haven't been integrated in considering buildings and what we call building simulations, performance simulations at the time. And also what was missing at the time when I did the research was that there is very little information about how people actually respond to and work and live in buildings. And so we started a group here at Iowa State University called Big Data for Sustainable Cities to track and to develop strategies to assess those external conditions in respect with people indoors.
Okay, so the Polk County Health Department came to you with observations on some inner city homes, that some were getting hotter than others. What did you do with that, and what did those first sensor readings tell you then?
Yeah, so we started working with the city of Des Moines, and of course Polk County is, Des Moines is in Polk County, and we were in a few neighborhoods. We did a tree inventory with a colleague on, in natural resource ecology and management here, Professor Thompson. We looked at the building fabrics. We started developing an energy model for a neighborhood, and Polk County Health learned about this, and they had heard concerns about very different heat expectations or heat performances in buildings, specifically in homes in the inner city neighborhoods which don't have air conditioning. And so what we did in 2017, we gave them a couple of sensors and they placed them in voluntary homes. And when the data came back, we realized that, yes, indeed, there was a big difference. Some buildings warmed up more than others, and some warmed up later than others. So there was big time difference. And so we started asking questions and developed a research proposal with an interdisciplinary team between social, human sciences, nature, technology, to develop this application where we would provide building models of, people's homes with weather forecasts and different factors of the external conditions.
Okay, let's get into the science and technology with you, Bhaskar. Building energy simulators already exist. What was the breakthrough in making this app work for personalized predictions at scale?
And you used all the keywords that I was going to use. Right? So the whole idea that building energy modeling simulators have existed. The Department of Energy uses this often for exploring various policies. What has not been done is this personalization for individual homes, and that's where Ulrike's idea of came in. Of could we do a survey, and then based on the survey results, figure out personalized these building energy modeling simulations for every individual house. So that accounts for the construction quality, the state of the envelope, essentially whether there's HVAC or no HVAC, and also eventually can we account for the near building environment? Are there concrete pavements? Are there asphalt? Is there trees around? Is there a lawn around, which all impact essentially the near microclimate impacts the amount of heat hitting the building envelope, which directly impacts the indoor quality and the heat. And this is where we used a collection of data science approaches, machine learning and AI approaches, along with the building energy modeling framework.
So you had sensors in homes in the summer while the app was making predictions, and you compared those two data sets, Bhaskar?
Yes, that is eventually the plan of action in that, and I will let Ulrike talk a little more about that. We deployed this whole framework this past summer, where, like Ulrike had alluded to, we had provided sensors to a variety of volunteers, and then we are also making predictions based on the app on what the indoor temperature is. This allows us an opportunity to evaluate how well the sensor, the app performs.
Before we get to Michael and the app design, Ulrike, did you have something to add to what Bhaskar just mentioned?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. Before we deployed the app this summer, we actually had two previous summers where we asked volunteers to participate in two different studies. One was taking, again, sensors into their homes and just measuring what's going on there, temperature and humidity. And we had what we call the Quick Capture app, where we actually asked people when it was too hot outside, when the National Weather Service had initiated a heat warning, what they were actually doing. And that together then led to the development of the app and the prototypes for specific homes. So we match specific home characteristics with a pre-developed model, which we have in the database.
Okay. Michael, let me turn to you if I can for the actual usage of this app, because up to now I can't quite picture it, and hopefully you can help us. So I download it on my phone. I don't know. Is it available? What does it look like? How does it operate? Why do I want it on my phone?
Yeah, so as Ulrike mentioned, we did this study over a couple of years trying to understand how do people behave in heat waves? What are some of the challenges that they face in taking any kind of action to stay safer? What's their level of knowledge about how dangerous it might be? And then we kind of marry that with what we know from literature as far as how do people make decisions. There's a theory called theory of planned behavior, where you look at you have to be motivated to make a change. You have to have the ability to make that change, and it has to be socially acceptable to make that change. And so putting all that together into the design of the app, we really wanted to answer the question: if we provide this personalized information, is that more effective in getting people to make better decisions about how to handle potentially dangerous temperatures within their house? So the app provides the temperature, or the predicted temperature inside your house. as well as information about what to do if that starts to get dangerous, and we would have different alert levels and things like that. But we also had a community aspect where maybe with a few trusted neighbors or some family members, you would actually be able to see each other's temperature, because one of the most effective mitigations is for, let's say your daughter to call you up and say, hey, Mom, it's getting a little hot in your house. Do you want to come over? I have air conditioning.
Oh, I see. You can monitor others who you might be worried about.
Well, that's right. And so, that's usually a very tight community because you're exposing kind of, the temperature inside your house. But just a few people in a tight social network is one of the most effective ways to sort of keep each other safe and keep an awareness of potentially dangerous situations.
Right.
One of the things with heat is that, this builds up over a couple days, right? Houses aren't cooling as fast as they used to as temperature gets hotter at night. And so this can kind of sneak up on you. It's okay the first day, it's a little more uncomfortable the second day, but by the third day, we're starting to get into those kind of dangerous areas. And so really thinking about ways to try and help people understand that.
Right. Unless people think that, heat is only dangerous outside. It's dangerous inside, isn't it, Michael? It can be.
Well, that's right. And in fact, it can be more dangerous because it's harder to escape from.
Yeah.
Outside there might be a breeze, there might be some shade. You can, you have access to different transportation and things like that. But if you're in your house, there's really no way to get away from it.
Yeah. We have about 5 minutes left. Tell us some more about this app. Is it available now? And just jump in there, the three of you, whoever would like to.
It's not yet available publicly. We've taken it down after the study to assess how it works, and it was only available as a prototype right now. But so when you look at it, you have it on the phone, you click on it, and you can see a little house, and there are temperature numbers inside. It's a range. There's a little sign on the side which indicates what the temperature outside will be, and it's color-coded like the National Weather Service has the color coding for the heat index. It uses heat index and temperature, so heat index includes humidity, which is a real challenge in Iowa, and everybody knows we are getting very humid in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can see the predictions for the next 12 hours. And that's based on a back end where we have a database of all these models, and there were like 40 different combinations. And they were matched the night before with the weather forecast from the Weather Service, and the simulations were run, and then you could see them. And if you had a green, you could realize, okay, it's going to be okay. If it's getting yellow and orange, sometimes houses warmed up, as we noticed, to about 90 or even higher degrees.
Yeah.
And then folks can actually see what the outside condition is doing for their inside house in the next few hours, so they could prepare.
Yeah. You were reminding me of my undergraduate years in the 1980s, early 1980s, my first freshman year at the University of Iowa at Hillcrest Dormitory on the hill above the river in Iowa City, a massive structure made of red brick, and it soaked up so much heat. So I know what.
Oh, yeah.
And it retained the heat. It didn't let you cool off at night. It was like being in some kind of kiln at night, baking
Right.
a little bit. But that just as an aside. I wanted you to mention here, because you really paid attention to equity and access in designing this app, because, people who have the means can buy expensive smart thermostats and Nest or something like that. But you want to make sure that these types of things are not are for inner city neighborhoods, older buildings, people who don't have
Correct.
the means for these smart thermostats, right?
Yeah, and that initial discussion also was brought to us through the Powell County Health Department. They gave us maps based on assessor data where they actually showed that in the inner city neighborhoods of Des Moines, there are up to 50% of homes who don't have central air conditioning. And that means buildings have either no or window units. And I think if you've ever lived in a house with a window unit, they are not as effective in conditioning the whole building as a central unit or central air conditioner. And we have to understand it's getting hotter, it's getting warmer, and those little machines don't function as well as anymore. And so that distribution is very specific. These older homes, these older neighborhoods where the homes have been built in the 19-teens or 20s or even earlier, they are challenged. And so that information is important, that we also can't just say, okay, we can give everybody an air conditioner, because it costs money, and people are really stressed with their financials during the months when it's getting hot, so they don't turn them on as often as they maybe should.
Mm-hmm. A quick word about the future of this app. When will it be publicly available? What has to happen before that?
Well, I think we need to first look at the data and see how well everything came together. And then we are planning to try for more funding to actually bring this to market, or to bring this to practice, as we say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This requires scale up, right? So, and of the framework itself, it requires more adoption, which is what the app essentially enables, building a social network, and it also perhaps requires more of a public-private partnership where academia produces the tools and the impact, and then the scale-up is perhaps handed over to a company.
And there's also
Go ahead, Michael.
There's also the opportunity to partner with local organizations to sort of bring the mitigations that they're providing, bringing information like that to the users, so that when they're triggered to realize that, hey, there's a situation, then they can quickly find out what are the available resources.
Do you have a name for the app yet, or are you still working on that? Are you batting around, brainstorming ideas?
Well, we have a name. It's called ComHeat, because that's what we called the whole project when we started applying for
Community Heat, ComHeat.
Community Heat, yes.
I got
Community
it.
Heat. And that's the name of the project so far. And what's interesting, it actually sticks with the people who've been using it. They now, email us at comheat@isdate.edu, and they say, hey, I have a ComHeat question. So it seems to have worked, that people understand what it does.
Repeat that contact information, Ulrika, please.
Okay, it's comheat@isdate.edu.
Okay. Thank you very much for this conversation. Coming into our Ames studio, Ulrika Passa, Professor of Architecture, Director of the Center for Building Energy Research at ISU, Michael Dorneyk, Morrell Professor of Industrial and Manufacturing Systems Engineering, and Bhaskar Ganapathu Subramanian Anderlich, Professor of Mechanical Engineering. Bhaskar, Michael, Ulrika, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure to be
Thanks.
here.
Thanks for having us.
River to River is produced by Caitlin Troutman, Danny Gear, and Samantha McIntosh. Our executive producer is Catherine Perkins. Hey, what's an easy way to keep up with all of the issues and guests on River to River? Go to your favorite podcast app, search for River to River, hit subscribe, and never miss an episode. That's it for today. On behalf of the entire River to River talk show team, I'm Ben Kiefer. Thanks for joining us.